Welcome to Building the Future. I'm your host, Kevin Horick. You can check out new episodes of the show every Tuesday and Thursday at 2 p.m. If you missed an episode or want to get more information about the show, please visit buildingthefutureshow.com. SoupX, the Startup Expo, North America's premier startup conference, is March 6th and 7th, 2017, in sunny Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Affordably priced, SoupX is a 2-day international conference featuring workshops, panels, speeches, a $50,000 startup competition, and over 100 exhibitors. For more information, go to sup-x.org. Welcome back to the show. Today we have Dillon Erb, co-founder at Paperspace. Dillon, welcome to the show.
Hey, Kevin, how's it going?
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on the show. I got lucky enough to get added to the beta, and I've been playing with your product for a few months now, and I'm excited to have you on the show. But before we maybe get into exactly what Paperspace is, let's get to know you a little bit better and start off with kind of where you grew up.
Yeah, great. So I actually grew up in Detroit, Michigan.
Okay.
And then down in North Carolina. So I moved to Charlotte for undergrad. So I went to University of North Carolina for undergrad, and then actually made my way back up to Michigan for grad school at University of Michigan, where I studied architecture. So between North Carolina and Detroit are kind of my two homes.
Okay. No, that's really cool. So what did you kind of take in university then?
Yeah, so I've actually always been, my primary passion has always been programming. So that's, although I didn't do that as a formal education for undergrad, I actually studied philosophy.
Okay.
And then I took a little time off, and then I decided I really wanted to apply this, kind of take programming more seriously. And at the time, I started getting really interested in, kind of areas where programmers were working that weren't maybe directly computer science. And actually, I ended up getting exposed to a couple of people that were doing some really interesting work in the building architecture world. So I kind of jumped all over the map, but the kind of the central thread has been programming. So I took some time off. I worked doing some kind of freelance web design. I did an iOS app at some point, and then I actually applied kind of on a whim initially to architecture schools, and I decided that I could apply my expertise in programming to some kind of new problems that were coming out, generally in the areas that are called kind of digital geometry, digital fabrication, and these are basically building architects have traditionally been a very analog profession, and recently, the last 10, 20 years, they've been adopting computers for kind of computer-aided design and that sort of thing. And in particular, there's really been a renaissance for doing things like applying scripting languages to generate really interesting geometries on one end for sort of the kind of design side, and then on the other end, programmers and engineers have. There's been a lot of work with building simulation work. So what that means is you're simulating a building and seeing how it performs under stress, or maybe an earthquake, or maybe structural properties. And a lot of these tools are still just getting really creative.
Sure. No, that makes a lot of sense. So at what point did you kind of decide to found Paperspace?
Yeah, so I actually started the company with one of my a friend who was in graduate school at the University of Michigan with me. He was also doing architecture,
okay.
And his name's Daniel Cobrand, and he and I we bonded very much over a lot of these really hard technological problems that were facing the discipline of architecture. He was working in an area called BIM, or Building Information Modeling, which is very generally the idea that you can have a single digital model that holds an entire building that the plumbers work on, the fabricators, the contractors, and everyone has a single digital model. So he was working on a lot of building information modeling, and at that time I was actually working for a researcher in the architecture engineering space that was doing a structural simulation problem. So anyway, our background is was in building architecture, but really we were doing a lot of technology problems. And at the time, we started talking a lot about, we both had computer problems, weirdly enough. I mean, everyone has their own form of computer problem.
Sure.
But ours were that, we didn't have access to enough computing power. And so I had just purchased a new computer. I think it was like $5,500, which was quite expensive. It was very hard to get the funding for it. And, that was to run some of the software I was building.
Sure.
And he was having the same issue at a firm that he was doing some technical advising for. So, very long story short, we started looking into like, hey, how do you fire up lots of computers on demand? And, what we were introduced to was Amazon Web Services, which
Sure.
is it's kind of taken over in a lot of this space for really inexpensive, for computing power, relatively on-demand computing power. So we started by, looking into like, hey, we can maybe fire up computers in the cloud somehow, and what does that mean? And what we realized was that, the technology was getting there, and there's, really amazing things happening in the cloud computing space, but largely that's been, inaccessible to everyone who doesn't have a really strong technical background. So initially, Paperspace started off as, let's wrap this really amazing technology and make it really easy so that anyone can fire up a cloud computer. And in particular, not just a command line computer, which developers use and scientists use, but actually a desktop computer. So we wanted to run a full desktop computer in the cloud. And we thought if we could do that and make it infinitely scalable and super easy to use, then we would open up a whole new class of computers for people to use for all sorts of things. Everything from designers, like the architects that we work with, to engineers, to even today we work with everyone from genomics researchers to financial services.
Sure.
So that was kind of the beginning of Paperspace.
Okay, so the one thing I'm curious about, did you know your co-founder before school, or you guys met in school?
Yeah, we actually met in school.
Okay.
And we had worked on a couple of projects together, actually dealing with robotic fabrication, oddly enough. And so we ended up just talking a lot about how, what the problems were facing architects and sort of their access to computer technology, and really the fact that we had to all buy very expensive computers and how they went out of date every 2 years. And we thought, surely this problem is solved. Why are we still buying clunky desktop computers that have speedometers on them? And they're kind of funny artifacts that we have underneath our desk.
Sure.
And so we were like, yeah, let's see, how do we replace these things? What would that look like? And what is the experience like of running a computer in the cloud? And a lot of these things, we're not doing design work right now necessarily, but I think a lot of the problems we were working with in architecture and sort of, we were really good users of this technology that really prepared us for kind of taking this problem on from a different perspective. So, we're very technical. I'm a programmer. Dan's not a programmer, but he is a very technical person. But I think the fact that we approached this as someone, as people who had a problem that needed to be solved, and we thought, well, what's the generalized case here? Like, what are problems other people have with computers? And when we started looking, digging deeper, we were like, wow, this is actually, it's kind of incredible what computers are sold to everyone for every use case. And in particular, we're talking about desktop computers here. And yet it's a very archaic technology.
Totally.
It's odd that you have to buy a new big box that, heats up your room and takes up a lot of space. It has to be replaced every few years. And, if you run out of space on it, you have to go out and buy a new hard drive and things like that. We thought that there was a huge opportunity to design a new experience around what that type of computing would look like.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think what you guys are doing is really cool. And, like I said, I've been playing with it for a while now. So, but for the listener, okay, like you've solved this problem, but what exactly is kind of Paperspace, and like what, I obviously I know what it is, but how do you describe it to people? Like, I know you're basically giving them a computer in the cloud, but what exactly is Paperspace?
Yeah, so, at the very base level, Paperspace is a desktop computer that lives in the cloud, but you can actually access it through any web browser. So what that means is you go to our website, paperspace.com, you create an account, and within just a few minutes, you can fire up a a new machine, and these machines are right now we only do Windows machines, although Linux is coming soon.
Okay.
We do Windows machines. You click create, and then a few minutes later, a full screen Windows desktop computer kind of takes over your screen on your computer. So a lot of the work that we've done is in actually what's called video streaming technology, kind of latency problems to make sure that that computer that really is living in a data center feels really native to you, and so that it feels like it's a computer right in front of you. That's one side of it, and then the other side is then the experience around it. So a really cool thing about a virtual computer, which is what Paperspace is that you can kind of change the specs on the fly. So you can add more hard drive, you can change the processors, you can add a bigger, faster GPU, and all of that can happen relatively seamlessly compared to the kind of physical counterpart that we are replacing.
Sure. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And you guys also have a Mac app as well. And you have a Windows app, correct?
Yep, correct. Yeah. So most of what we do, I mean, our vision for this is that everything will happen in the web at some point, and the web is sort of the underlying piece. And that's actually one of the big differentiators when we started this was there are other companies, and usually they're kind of primarily focused on the enterprise space that do desktop virtualization, or the kind of technical term for it is VDI, or virtual desktop infrastructure. But those are really built. These companies were built, in the era that was kind of pre-web, and before you could assume that all devices would be connected and you would have good internet, and it would be reliable and that sort of thing. So we built everything from the web, and what that means is the client application is actually an HTML5 JavaScript application that lives in the web browser. So ignoring the technical part, it just means that you can go up to any computer and log in, and then there's your desktop in the cloud. And also, we're building for the idea is to work on any device, which is, we haven't solved it 100% on every device, but the more that the web evolves and the more that the technology kind of evolves with it, then the Paperspace will be a fully web-native virtual desktop.
Sure, and I think it's worth mentioning, like, I've used Paperspace on my Chromebook as well, and it works actually really well.
Yeah, so that's the kind of future that we see, and there are a lot of possible futures for computing because it is such a big class of products. But generally our view here is that any device can be a portal into your desktop in the cloud. So
sure.
There are many people can use just an iPhone as their primary computer or an iPad, and that's totally fine. Our primary consumer is someone who needs a little bit more power. So if you go into the architecture industry or the engineering industry, you won't see Chromebooks that are just used as vanilla Chromebooks just yet, because you really need a full desktop operating.
Yeah.
And so what we see, Paperspace right now is kind of bridging those two worlds, which is you need a lot of power because you're running, say, an application that requires a lot of just computing power. Maybe that's Excel and you're doing a lot of work with it, or Tableau is one that we work with a lot. 3D modeling is another big one.
Yeah.
But you want to be able to access it from anywhere. So Chromebook is we actually recommend a lot of Chromebooks, and we use them here because they're, in a weird way, it's like the computer itself, the hardware becomes sort of dispensable, and the real thing lives in the cloud, and it's always backed up, it's redundant, and you never have to buy another one. That's the cool thing about it.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And I think the thing is, too, that at least my big pain point that you guys have kind of solved for me is I have to do some video editing sometime, or sometimes my Photoshop files get really big. And like I have a MacBook Pro, and kind of the top of the line one, and I'm always running out of storage space or computing power. And you figure for spending, $3,000 or more on a computer, you'd be able to do some I consider it like pretty basic video editing. Like I only using a couple gig files, and some of the Photoshop files are just hundreds of megs, and sometimes the Mac just chokes, right? And
totally, yeah. I think exactly that's a big use. I mean, we're in the same position. We end up doing a lot of Photoshop files that don't work on the laptops that have been designed to be. Well, the MacBook Pro is a high level one, but we use a lot of sort of the MacBook Air or the really thin Lenovo's that are built for lots of battery, for being light, and they're really not built to be, workstation computers, which a lot of people still need for at least a little bit of time for, what their use case is.
Sure. So I'm curious then to know kind of other use cases for Paperspace. We kind of talked about work, but you guys are also supporting, well, it's basically like full Windows in the cloud. So you guys are supporting, obviously anything you can basically do on Windows, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because just like a desktop computer, there are really a million use cases, and
Sure.
every day there's someone asking us to, about they're running some application I never would have thought of. Gaming is a big one also. We're doing a lot of work right now in the gaming space, and actually, that's an area where we're getting more interest. And if you can run a full desktop computer, obviously people will try to run Steam and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And it's pretty cool when you run The Witcher 3 on a Chromebook, because that's just not something that which is a popular, very intensive video game that normally would not run even on a fancy computer that you have, just running on a Chromebook. So it's a nice tech demo that we give, and also we're pretty agnostic as to what application you're running. We think of ourselves as a computer company that sells a computer that just happens to live in the cloud instead of under your desk.
Right. So you mentioned you guys are going to be adding Linux soon. Do you kind of have a rough release date for that, or like by the end of the year? You don't know yet?
So definitely by the end of the year. We have a version that we've been testing with a lot of people.
Okay.
Our core competency has really been Windows, because that's where a lot of the really high-end applications they still live.
Sure.
Are in the Windows space. The cool thing about virtualization is that we can run almost any operating system. It's more of which one, if we're going to do it, we want to make sure that that we do it right, and that it feels really good, and it actually, it has the polish to it that we would be happy to release it. So I don't have an immediate release date for it, but it's definitely the next big thing that we've been working on, and we're, we are super excited on what that's going to look like as well.
Sure. And then I guess you probably get asked this all the time, but will you ever be able to do Mac OS?
Mac is super interesting. The kind of honest answer is we haven't had, the demand. So Macs are obviously a big part of the computing market, but that part of it actually hasn't overlapped a lot with what we do. We thought it would be a much bigger part.
Okay.
But really, most of the companies that we work with and individuals are looking for Windows.
Okay.
So, it's one of those things that if the demand were there, it's definitely something we would, put more resources into. There are some, technically, it's not a very hard thing to do. There are some weird licensing things that make it a little bit difficult with how you do it, but certainly not insurmountable. So we'll see. I mean,
Sure.
Right now, the Windows product is the primary one that works great. We will do Linux next, and stay tuned. I don't have any official answer, but certainly a possibility.
Sure. I guess it's like why curiosity really lies in, I don't even know if Apple would even let you do that, right? Because it's not running on their hardware. Like, I don't know, right?
Yeah, it's a very, there are actually hosting companies that do Mac in the cloud. A lot of the image processing applications actually need Mac OS.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if it would be a desktop. I don't know. It's an interesting problem, but I do think that kind of the general problem that we're solving, which is like, how do you just access this thing, and what is that experience like? I mean, our vision for accessing a computer in the cloud is that when you walk up to a terminal, that it just sort of materializes your desktop, and then when you walk away, it fades out. I mean, that's the level of sort of elegance that we want to exist. And right now, that happens to be a Windows product that we sell to, primarily Windows shops that do, everything from genomics. Like I said, we have a really interesting customer who's doing a lot of like simulation work in the genomic space, to financial services where they do modeling, they do
Sure.
Lots of things I probably don't even know what it is that they're using the machines for. So it's interesting. I mean, we try to be as generic as possible, because that's how we see the company, is like, hey, we're doing a computer. It just so happens to be one that, like I said, it's virtual and lives in the cloud.
Yeah, and you're right. Most software that you need lots of hard drive space for, and lots of like RAM and computing power, is kind of the Adobe suite and like video editing, 3D stuff, kind of stuff that's really processor intensive, and it's always been better on Windows. And gaming, right? It's always been better on Windows, so it just makes sense, right?
Yeah, just kind of two different histories. I mean, a lot of the applications that we work with, one's called, for example, SolidWorks. Is an application like many others that have been developed for Windows for a very long time. And
Sure.
these applications, I mean, people ask like, when's the web version going to come out? I do think that the long-term future of the web is really interesting for high-end applications, but the reality is right now, no one has solved for kind of the Chrome OS version of these things because it's a very hard problem, and we're very new, we're very early on to the kind of web OS world. So Paperspace, the way we see it now, is like it's a bridge between. It allows you to do the things that you would normally do with the powerful workstation computer, but also do it on a Chromebook. And what is that? Basically, fast forwarding the virtual desktop industry to up to speed with the kind of web as it's been sort of created in the last 5 to 10 years.
No, I agree with you, and I think the future is, and you guys are already kind of doing this, is basically at some point the user really doesn't care what OS they're running, or at least I think in the future, the average person won't care. They just literally want to run the apps that they need and like let somebody in the cloud sort out what needs to run in the background to run their applications, whether it's Photoshop or a 3D thing or gaming or some third party, thing they need for some research or whatever. They don't really care. They just want like it to work on their computer, right? And the fact that you guys are building something that works literally on any computer with an internet connection and a browser, it doesn't really matter, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So I think that the promise that I think you're getting at, which we talk about a lot here at Paperspace, is that is the vision. I mean, I think everyone kind of has this shared dream of what computers should be, which are kind of effortless devices that do the thing that you want them to do, regardless of how complex or processing intensive or whatever it is. And the moment you have to go buy a new hard drive or upgrade your RAM in your computer, it's just or upgrade a whole machine, because a lot of machines now, especially laptops, you can't change anything about them. It's still it seems like a very old experience. It seems like something we shouldn't have to do anymore. And the web, by contrast, you have applications that are constantly updating and are evolving and getting more complex. So you have these two ends of the spectrum that are, especially in the enterprise space where we do a lot of our work, they haven't been reconciled yet. And we see that the current version of the software is doing exactly that, which is bringing a lot of enterprise companies, especially big ones, they use virtual desktops not really even for the performance. Although we do, our specialty is high performance. They need it just because once you begin to manage, say, 10,000 computers, you don't want to, just from a purely administrative perspective, you don't want to go around as an IT person and, provision all of those machines under desks. So most big companies, as in 100% of the Fortune 500, use virtual desktops in some capacity.
Totally.
It has to do a lot with security, reliability. Security is actually probably the biggest one in financial services because a virtual desktop, unlike a laptop, you can't lose it because it lives in lives in a server. So if someone loses their Lenovo or whatever laptop they have or their iPad, you can just cut it off at the source, and you don't have to worry about data leaking out.
Sure.
So so there's these two worlds, and I think that no one has figured out exactly what a normal computer looks like for a regular person at a company 10 years from now. But I think what we're kind of getting at or hinting at is that future.
No, I totally agree with you. So you guys have kind of a unique pricing model. Do you maybe want to kind of cover how that works?
Yeah, definitely. So we have, there's kind of two big, or there's two types of billing that we do. One is a more traditional kind of cloud service style where you can fire up a machine for per hour, basically, although actually we bill prorated to the minute.
Okay.
But you can fire it up for really whatever you need. And we have people that need to do, things like render farms, which are they're used in a lot of the design visualization space where they need to fire up a lot of computers really quickly.
Sure.
And then they don't need them after the job is done. So we do have an hourly pricing model, which means that you're just paying for what you use, which is, really awesome for companies that don't want to have to buy, a bunch of computers that will sit idle most of the time.
Sure.
The cool thing about, the virtual desktop model is that when you're not using your Paperspace computer and you turn it off, then someone else can, kind of tap into that capacity. So it's a very efficient model. So we do have the hourly one. And then we also have a more traditional, kind of desktop replacement, which is a monthly pricing model. You pay for the full month. The machine is on the entire time, and anywhere you go, you log in, and it just pops up right where you left off. So we do both of those, and actually, we have kind of in between things as well, where some people will switch back and forth depending on their use cases, or maybe have two computers, one that they run hourly, and then one which is their kind of primary one. So those are the two ones. And then in terms of the kind of specs of the machines, we currently have 3 different models, which you can upgrade and downgrade between, but there's a kind of very lightweight version, which is good for just having access to, if you're a law firm and you want to have if you want to have a VPN access to your office and be able to access it from any web browser, it's a great fit. It's called the Erb machine. And then on the high end, we also have machines with pretty much as much capacity as you would need, which is up to 32 cores of computing power on just a single box, and then as many of those as you want to string together, and as much RAM as you really need. So anywhere in the gamut there, across the gamut, we have a lot of options and for very different use cases. And one thing that we're doing now is basically seeing where a lot of that demand is and seeing if it makes sense to add an even higher level capacity for the really, really boutique high-end use cases.
Sure. And then how is your kind of team plan similar and different from what you just described?
Yeah, so we also have a second option called Paperspace for Teams, which we actually have a big announcement coming soon about that, which are a lot of tools that enterprise need. Like I mentioned, a lot of big companies,
sure.
they do use virtual desktops, and this is a software as a service version of a virtual desktop, which means that you don't have to be a Fortune 500 company to use it, although you certainly can. You can be a company that is 500 people that really needs a virtual desktop solution, and you don't want to buy hardware. You can just come to our website, and we do have what we call Paperspace for Teams, which is it includes things like Active Directory integration, which a lot of companies use. It's sort of their identity management system in a lot of corporate environments. VPN integration, so a lot of companies have, even the small ones have a really hard time integrating with a VPN. So that's just like, hey, I want to be at home and access all of my files in the office.
Sure.
We have a really painless integration with most VPNs. And then also things like user management, snapshots, templates, alerting for when things look, maybe there's suspicious activity or you want to terminate an account, things like that. More tools that are designed for an IT administrator to actually onboard an entire virtual desktop environment.
Sure. No, I think that's awesome. So I know like you probably don't want to give away too much stuff, and we've kind of covered this throughout the show a little bit, but is there anything else that you kind of want to mention where you see kind of Paperspace going either by the end of the year or within the next year or two?
Yeah, so we do have a couple of big announcements coming up that I will just allude to, but
sure.
Basically we've been doing one of our core competencies as a company has always been around a technology called the GPU, or the graphics processing unit. So all Paperspace machines have a powerful GPU inside of them. So we are doing a lot of work around giving people access to more and more powerful GPUs. And the use cases for that are, there's really a lot, and we're getting a lot of interest from everyone from the kind of machine learning, which is where they use, they do very complicated statistical modeling, and they need a lot of processing power, to kind of big data analytics and things like that. So we're right now we offer a really kind of painless virtual desktop, but we are adding a lot of functionality to make it easy to fire up lots of those machines, tie them together, and really squeeze out a lot of performance. So so that's kind of where it's going. like I mentioned, Linux is the next big thing that we will
Sure.
be, kind of releasing once it's battle tested, and I think that will open up a lot of use cases that that are not fully served by Windows virtual desktops right now. So we'll see. I mean, it'll be an interesting next few months, but it has to do with basically opening up more and more of the power that we have developed to run Paperspace, kind of the core product, and giving people access to a lot of tools and features to really take advantage of that power.
Sure. I think that makes a lot of sense. So I'm kind of curious to cover maybe a little bit of how do you, like, you guys have it right on your homepage about kind of being safe and secure, but just for the listener, how are you guys kind of handling security?
Yeah, totally. So security is we think of that as actually the most important thing, even
Sure.
beyond performance, because it doesn't matter how performant it is, performative if the security is not there. So there are a lot of practices that you do if you're a data center provider or you provide these types of services in the cloud. And they range from actually physical security, so how you lock down your machines at the data center, and there are a million things that you have to do, but the core of it is it's much more secure to have a computer running in a data center, which is behind many, many levels of physical security than your computer sitting on your laptop or at Starbucks or in your house or wherever.
Sure.
And then from the actual virtual machine to the client, which is you connecting to it, there's a lot that we do with encryption to make sure that effectively we don't know what's going on in the machine. Like I kind of alluded to earlier, there are many people using Paperspace, and I don't know, and I don't want to know what they're doing, because we see this as if Dell were to ship you a computer and say, hey, here it is, do whatever you want. So we are working very hard to be an absolute zero knowledge kind of platform where we don't know anything about the internals of the VM. It's an interesting technical problem, because a lot of what we also do is we want to make sure that the machines are running at all times, and we've had to develop some really interesting kind of technical solutions to. We have no idea what's going on in your machine, but we guarantee that it's running really well, which is kind of
that's tricky.
It's kind of hard to. Yeah, so we've bumped into every one of those types of problems, but we're a team of hardcore developers based here in New York City that really geek out on these types of problems, and security is the absolute most important part about Paperspace, and that's really where we have and continue to develop or devote an enormous amount of resources.
Sure. No, that makes a lot of sense. So I guess, like, how do you guys kind of handle, like, and I get without getting a little bit too technical, but like, is it up to me, I guess, as the user of Paperspace to worry about kind of viruses and kind of, any of the adware kind of stuff, or how do you guys kind of handle that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. It is basically just like buying a new computer yourself, in the sense that whatever's happening internally, you have to kind of follow security best practices. If you install an antivirus piece of software, an anti-malware, then that's on you. But one of the nice benefits is that we do run Paperspace is really it's locked down in more ways than a traditional computer is even locked down. Meaning, you can't get to it through any way except for you can't even get to the virtual machine without going through a secondary authentication process, an authorization process, which is going through our the web interface through the application, the API. But effectively, what that means is that a lot of things that normally computers might be susceptible to are non-issues, because you're behind a very powerful proxy and a very private network that's totally devoted to you, and only you can have access to it. So we do recommend best practices, like, hey, if don't open up emails that, it is still possible to download a virus and that sort of thing.
Sure.
But we do everything we can, if at all possible, from the outside to get rid of any of that stuff.
Got you. Okay. And then I guess it's just like any other machine. Like, I'm expected to back up my own data, whether it's through Dropbox or Google Drive or whatever.
Yeah. So one thing we do, we actually do have we offer a thing called templates and snapshots, so that you can actually, through our interface, click a button and it'll take a backup of the machine. But we still, as best practice, it's always good to have
Sure.
your Dropbox and Google Drive and everything else there. But really, we are redundant. We are backed up at our data center, and we feel very safe with data that's put on the Paperspace.
Got you. Okay. No, that's great. Well, we're kind of coming to the end of the show. How about we kind of close the show with maybe giving a quick recap again of what exactly Paperspace is, and then where
Absolutely.
people can find you guys online?
Yeah. So Paperspace is a full desktop computer that lives in the cloud, and you can access it through any web browser. It's super fast, so you can do things like gaming or anything else you might do with a regular computer. You can find us at paperspace.com. We also do have tools for teams as well as individuals. So if you are a company that may use virtual desktops or be interested in how this technology can solve problems that you guys might have, we have a lot of tools that make it very easy to get started and move your aging computer infrastructure into the cloud. Perfect.
Well, Dillon, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day to be on the show. I look forward to keeping in touch with you, and I look forward to keep using Paperspace. And, maybe we'll have you guys on again, maybe later in the year or early next year to talk about kind of where you've kind of gone in the last 6 months.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're looking forward to it. Thanks for having me.
Great, man. Well, we'll talk soon, and have a good rest of your day.
Perfect. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. The music for the show was done by Electric Mantra. You can check them out at electricmantra.com and keep building the future.